What happens when a politician walks into a trap but leaves the trap setter exposed instead? That's exactly what Jasmine Crockett did on national TV, and Laura Ingraham never saw it coming. It all exploded in a moment that no one saw coming. What started as just another political segment took a turn so sharp it left the studio silent and millions of viewers stunned. The setting, a primetime slot on Fox, hosted by none other than Laura Ingraham, a name that carries weight, controversy, and a reputation for hard-hitting interviews. But this time, she invited someone who came ready, not just with facts, but with fire. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. As the lights went up and the questions began, the tension was almost immediate. Crockett, known for her sharp mind and calm control, entered the segment prepared. She wasn't there to argue. She wasn't there to entertain. She was there to speak her truth and defend her stance on issues that affect real people every day. But Laura Ingraham had other plans. Ingraham kicked off the interview in typical fashion. A bold opening, a few sarcastic jabs, and a tone that suggested she was ready to lead the conversation, not share it. At first it was the usual back and forth, a disagreement here, a challenge there. But as the seconds ticked by, the interview began to feel less like a discussion and more like an ambush. Instead of focusing on legislation, lawmaking, or Crockett's district work, Ingraham steered the conversation into murky waters. She questioned Crockett's credibility. She brought up past appearances. She even hinted that Crockett was part of a growing trend of Democrats who are louder than they are effective. But that's where things changed, because Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Rather than biting back with the same sarcasm, Crockett paused. She'll let the tension build. Then, with one cool breath, she began to flip the entire interview on its head. Her tone didn't rise. She didn't start pointing fingers or making wild accusations. Instead, she asked one simple but piercing question. Is this really about policy or just politics? That's when the air shifted. Ingraham, known for controlling the pace of her interviews, tried to jump in. She cut Crockett off mid-sentence. She threw out labels. She even tried to redirect the topic. But Crockett stayed steady. With each attempt to derail the conversation, Crockett brought it back, calmly, assertively, and with a precision that was impossible to ignore. If I'm here to discuss serious issues, she said, then let's do that. But if you brought me here just to play the usual game, I won't be a piece on your board. You could hear the control slipping. Ingraham, who usually holds the upper hand in confrontations like these, found herself in unfamiliar territory. Her guest wasn't rattled. She wasn't falling for the bait. She was recentering the focus and putting the host's own tactics under the spotlight. And this was no small flip. In the world of high-stakes interviews, especially with powerful media figures, holding your ground takes more than just preparation. It takes principle. Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was calling out the format, the tone, and the agenda behind it by turning the attention back on the host. Crockett forced the audience to question what they were really watching. Was it a debate, a hit job, a distraction, or something more concerning? A moment where media power tried to shape the truth instead of reveal it. The most unforgettable part of that moment wasn't the confrontation. It was the silence that followed. Ingraham paused. For once the interruption didn't come. She blinked briefly, almost as if realizing that something just changed, that her usual control had slipped. And in that pause, Crockett made her real statement, not just with words, but with calm defiance, because what she showed live and unfiltered was that no matter how loud the host, no matter how aggressive the question, truth has its own volume. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. This wasn't just a clash between two personalities. It was a wake-up call. A moment where a guest took control of the narrative and reminded the audience the loudest voice isn't always the right one, and sometimes the most powerful flip comes not with anger, but with clarity. That moment echoed beyond the screen. It sparked a conversation. It turned a routine appearance into a defining confrontation, and for many watching, it became crystal clear. Jasmine Crockett didn't just survive the fire, she held it in her hands and reshaped it. Live unshaken, unapologetic. In today's political battlefield, there's a growing concern that often goes unnoticed: the shift from journalism to judgment. Once upon a time, news anchors and hosts were considered the bridge between the people and the truth. Their job: ask the tough questions, hold power to account, and let the facts speak louder than the opinions. But now, more and more viewers are asking the same uneasy question. When did the media stop reporting and start attacking? That's the question at the heart of what happened between Laura Ingraham and Jasmine Crockett. Because this clash wasn't just about two individuals. It revealed something deeper, a pattern where the media doesn't just challenge politicians, but tries to define them, corner them, and control the way we see them. Laura Ingraham isn't new to controversy. Her style is sharp, her tone aggressive, and her interviews are known for being combative. But there's a fine line between pressing a guest for clarity and pushing them into a corner for spectacle. And in this particular interview, it became clear that the line wasn't just crossed, it was erased. Rather than dig into Congresswoman Crockett's legislative work or give her space to explain her perspective on real issues affecting Americans, Ingraham jumped straight into personal framing. She accused Crockett of being part of a divisive movement. She threw out labels designed to corner her, and she asked questions that didn't seem to want answers. They wanted reactions. This is what happens when media turns into a courtroom, and the guest isn't just interviewed, they're interrogated. Crockett, to her credit, recognized this early. She didn't play into the bait, but her calm pushback brought something powerful into focus. The media, especially certain high-profile platforms, often walk into interviews with a story already written. The guest just has to play their assigned role, and that's a problem. When platforms like these become less about informing the public and more about shaping public perception, we stop learning, we start assuming, we stop understanding, and we start fighting ghosts instead of confronting real problems. The real issue isn't whether Laura Ingraham likes Jasmine Crockett. It's that millions of people watching may never get a true sense of who Crockett is or what she stands for because the questions weren't meant to reveal. They were meant to box her in. And this isn't unique to one network or one host. It's becoming the norm across much of today's media, where confrontation is favored over conversation, and where provoking outrage is more profitable than promoting understanding. But here's the danger. When the media becomes the attacker, who defends the truth? The public relies on news and talk shows to deliver information, not insults. But the more interviews turn into battlegrounds, the harder it becomes to separate fact from theater. Politicians who shout the loudest get the most airtime. Those who refuse to play the game are often cut off or edited out. And the audience is left not with answers but with confusion. Crockett's pushback in the interviews served as more than a personal defense. It was a quiet alarm bell. It reminded viewers that not everything said on TV is about truth. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's about narrative. And sometimes it's about silencing voices that refuse to follow the script. That raises a critical point. Who's writing the script? Because if journalists and hosts start deciding what story gets told before the guest even sits down, then the public isn't getting the full picture. They're getting a filtered version of reality, and that's a dangerous place to be in a democracy. Jasmine Crockett didn't flip out, walk off, or lose her cool. She stayed seated and flipped the conversation instead, not just back to herself, but toward a much-needed reflection. Are we being informed or are we being directed? When media becomes the aggressor, it loses the very trust it claims to protect, and it risks becoming the very thing it once warned us about, a tool for shaping minds, not opening them. In that moment with Ingraham, Crockett wasn't just a guest, she was a mirror. And what she reflected back wasn't just about herself, it was about all of us. And the media we've come to accept, because if the people can no longer count on the media to be fair, then the only truth left is the one we fight to uncover ourselves. The moment things went from tense to explosive was not a matter of if, but when. From the opening seconds, it was obvious that Laura Ingraham didn't invite Jasmine Crockett to speak, she invited her to spar. And as the interview progressed, what started as a heated exchange quickly escalated into something much more revealing. Laura Ingraham has a reputation, confrontational, sharp, and always in control. She interrupts, pivots, and challenges guests in a way that often tilts the entire interview in her favor. But with Jasmine Crockett, she ran into something unexpected, a guest who wasn't just prepared, but unshaken. And that calmness seemed to throw Ingraham off. What began as pointed questions about policy turned into something more personal. Ingraham didn't just question Crockett's stances, she began to question her motives. She accused her of being more about show than substance, implying that Crockett's public presence had more to do with gaining attention than serving the people. It was a low blow, and one that came with an edge. Instead of letting Crockett answer fully, Ingraham kept cutting her off. Every time Crockett tried to steer the conversation toward actual solutions or legislative work, Ingraham would circle back to the same narrative. You're loud, you're divisive, you're part of the problem. And that's when the real escalation began. Ingraham shifted from host to aggressor, layering her tone with condescension and sarcasm. At one point, she even smirked as she accused Crockett of playing the victim, even though Crockett hadn't raised her voice or made it about herself at all. This kind of tactic isn't new. When logic doesn't win, some resort to framing. Paint your guest as angry, emotional, or irrational, and suddenly, their points lose weight in the eyes of the viewer. That's the playbook. But Crockett didn't fall for it. She sat there, stone-faced, absorbing the barrage without breaking form. She answered the questions she was allowed to answer. And when the interruptions became relentless, she calmly pointed it out, not with frustration, but with control. I came to have a real conversation, she said at one point. If that's not the plan, you should have just told me. That sentence landed like a hammer, and instead of easing off, Ingraham doubled down. She brought up past comments Crockett had made out of context. She tried to corner her on identity politics, claiming that leaders like her divide the country instead of uniting it. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a performance, but not by Crockett. Ingraham was doing what many media personalities do when faced with someone they can't out-talk, shift from facts to framing. And the framing here was clear. To reduce Crockett from a congresswoman to a caricature, a black woman, a Democrat, passionate, assertive, all things that in the wrong hands can be twisted into threats rather than strengths. That's what Ingraham leaned on, not Crockett's record, not her policy work, but the perception she wanted the audience to have. It's a tactic that works on many, but not this time, because as Ingraham escalated, it became obvious to viewers that this wasn't about debate anymore. This was about discrediting someone live, in real time, and that realization began to shift the energy of the moment. Crockett's calmness became her armor. Her refusal to take the bait only made the host appear more desperate to control the moment, and in that, the power began to shift. Every smirk from Ingraham, every interruption, every sarcastic line, it all began to feel like noise next to Crockett's steady voice. And that's where escalation often backfires. When a host pushes too hard, too fast, and too often, the audience doesn't just question the guest, they begin to question the host. Why won't she let her speak? Why is she so rattled? Crockett never had to raise her voice. She didn't need a dramatic outburst. She just needed patience, because the more Ingraham pushed, the more she revealed. Not about Crockett, but about herself. And by the end of that segment, it was clear to many watching, Crockett didn't just hold her ground. She forced the host to reveal her own agenda. That's what escalation does. It doesn't expose the one being attacked. It exposes the attacker, especially when the target refuses to play the game. This was the moment everything changed, not just for the interview, but for the entire narrative Laura Ingraham was trying to control. Up until now, she had done everything in her power to paint Jasmine Crockett into a corner. She framed her as loud, divisive, and ineffective. She interrupted, smirked, and tried to steer the conversation into a trap, but Jasmine didn't fall for any of it. She waited, and when the timing was right, she didn't shout, she didn't storm out, she flipped the entire script, live on air, with calm but piercing precision. It started with a single sentence. Jasmine looked directly into the camera, then turned to Ingraham with a steady gaze and said, "If I'm here for theatrics, then what exactly are we doing right now?" Boom. It was like a pin dropped. The tone in the room shifted instantly. The smirks faded. Ingraham froze for half a second, long enough for everyone watching to know she'd been hit with something unexpected. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words cut sharper than any insult. They weren't about emotion. They were about exposing the game being played and refusing to play it. From there, Crockett took control. "I was invited to speak on serious issues," she continued. "But this entire segment has been built around who you think I am, not who I actually am. That's not journalism. That's performance." It was as if Crockett had taken every jab thrown at her and turned them into a mirror, reflecting them right back at the host who had tried to define her. Ingraham tried to interject, but Crockett didn't allow the moment to be stolen. Without being rude or dismissive, she reclaimed her time and the floor. "Let's talk about legislation," she said firmly. "Let's talk about how we're going to fix housing, policing, education, not about how loud my voice is or how uncomfortable the truth makes you." That line cut deep. Not because it was rehearsed. It wasn't. It was real. It was rooted in everything Crockett stood for: clarity, focus, and refusing to let distractions win. But what made this flip so powerful wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Crockett wasn't flustered. She wasn't defensive. She was composed, centered, and in full control. And that's exactly what Laura Ingraham didn't expect, because when you bring someone on your show expecting to run the show, the last thing you want is for them to take the wheel and drive straight through your narrative. That's exactly what happened. Crockett called out the interruptions. She highlighted how every meaningful topic had been dodged. She made it clear to the viewers that what they were watching wasn't a real conversation, it was a setup. And with every calm sentence, she unraveled the threads Ingraham had tried to spin around her. By the time she finished, there was no shouting match. There didn't need to be one. Ingraham had tried to create a spectacle, but Crockett refused to play the character she was handed. Instead, she became something far more dangerous to someone like Ingraham, a truth-teller who couldn't be rattled. And let's be clear, this wasn't about scoring political points or delivering a mic-drop moment. Crockett wasn't interested in winning the argument. She was interested in exposing the system behind the argument, the method, the manipulation. Because when someone is calm in the face of provocation, it reveals who's actually trying to stir chaos. That's what Crockett did. She revealed that the chaos wasn't coming from her. It was coming from behind the desk. As the segment neared its end, there was an awkward silence. Ingraham tried to recover, throwing in a closing line that felt forced and flat. The control she usually held, gone. The dominance she built her brand on, undermined not by aggression but by grace. In that one segment, Crockett didn't just survive the fire. She made it clear she could walk through it without even flinching. And in doing so, she didn't just flip the script, she rewrote the rules. By the time the segment ended, viewers weren't just left with opinions, they were left with questions, not about Jasmine Crockett, not even about Laura Ingraham, but about something far more important: who's really controlling the truth? Because when the cameras cut and the lights dimmed, the moment stayed alive in the minds of millions. Not because of any headline, or drama, or gotcha moment, but because of what that conversation revealed about the world we're living in. A world where media doesn't just report on power, it wields it. Where hosts don't just ask questions, they frame the answers before they're even given. And where politicians aren't invited to explain, they're summoned to perform. Crockett refused to perform. She came prepared, serious, and ready to talk about real problems. And when she saw that the platform she was given wasn't designed for dialogue but for dismissal, she didn't panic. She didn't play the victim. She calmly peeled back the curtain and showed the audience what was really happening. And that's what made the moment so powerful. It wasn't just about defending herself, it was about defending the truth. Crockett reminded everyone watching that not all media is created equal. Some platforms are built to inform, to challenge ideas, and to ask hard questions in good faith. But others are built to shape narratives, discredit voices, and protect their own interests, even if it means misleading viewers. In that studio, in front of millions, Crockett made it clear that the most dangerous thing isn't a politician with a microphone, it's a media empire with a script. Let's be honest. It's easy to watch political interviews and think, well, they're all the same, but this wasn't the same. This wasn't two sides arguing policy. This was one person trying to push a story and another refusing to be reduced to a headline. And that refusal, it flipped the entire dynamic, because the real danger isn't disagreement, it's distortion. It's when someone with a platform chooses not to challenge your ideas, but to attack your identity. It's when a conversation becomes a performance, and the guest is just a prop in a larger agenda. That's what Crockett called out. And here's what's really worth reflecting on. If a sitting member of Congress can be treated this way on national television, what does that say about the state of public discourse? If someone who was elected to represent the people can't get through a single interview without being interrupted, disrespected, or reframed, then what chance does the average citizen have to be heard? This moment wasn't just about media versus politics, it was about power versus truth. And Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak truth to power, she exposed power trying to control the truth. She did it without theatrics, without shouting, without taking the bait. And in doing so, she reminded the audience, and maybe even Laura Ingraham herself, that strength doesn't always look like noise. Sometimes it looks like silence held with purpose. Sometimes it looks like refusing to play along. The truth doesn't need volume, it needs clarity. And Crockett delivered it. So now the real question belongs to us, the viewers, the citizens, the people who rely on these platforms to make sense of the world. Are we being informed, or are we being told what to think? Are these interviews meant to uncover the truth or to bury it under conflict? And if someone calmly speaking facts is treated like a threat, then maybe the people doing the talking are afraid of something deeper, that their control over the story is slipping, because when a guest flips the script and takes back their narrative, it shows us that truth doesn't need permission. It just needs a voice brave enough to speak it, even in the lion's den. Jasmine Crockett walked into that den, and she walked out not just unshaken but stronger. Not because she shouted the loudest, but because she refused to be silenced, and in that refusal, she handed the mic to every person watching, and asked the question we can't ignore anymore. If the media isn't working for the truth, who is it working for?